Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned to talk about a scary clown. Roger and I are going to be talking about a scary clown because I am reading this big crazy book. I'm reading Stephen King's It. I just started it. Well, I didn't just start it. I started it yesterday, and I'm 60 pages in. You'd never guess, but that's 60 pages right there. I've read 60 pages so far of it, which means I only have 1,100 pages to go. So, years ago, I started a BookTube channel. And shortly after I started, I came up with a brilliant idea, the Read Every Book by Challenge. And what I did is I asked my few viewers, the dozen people who were watching me at the time, hey, come up with some names of some writers, that you want me to read every book by. And I'll put these writers' names on a wheel and I'll spin the wheel. And whichever writer wins the spin, I will read that author's book. That author's books, all of that author's books. And somebody came up with the name Stephen King. So I can't remember who, but somebody came up with Stephen King. The video is still on my channel somewhere. But somebody came up with Stephen King, and lo and behold, the wheel landed on Stephen King, the guy who writes a book every year and has since I was a little child, and will continue to keep writing books until he's 100-something years old, probably. So there have been many Stephen King books that have been published since I started this challenge. Thanks, Stephen King. But, Stephen King won the challenge. I have to read every book by Stephen King. Now, a lot of these books I read, the books from the 70s and 80s anyway, when I was younger, when I was a teenager. But not nearly all of them. So I worked my way through the 1970s. I read all of the 1970s Stephen King books. Now, these are books as they were released under Stephen King's name. So the Bachman books I literally just got to. And I made my way through the 1980s until 1986, which is when this big bastard was published. And this is a book that I read right after it was published, I believe. I got a hardcover of this. I was excited. I got a hardcover of it. And I read it, and I was 15 years old when I read this book. If this came out in 86, that means I was 15. And I had already read a few Stephen King books. I had read Salem's Lot. Did I read The Shining? I might have. I read a few Stephen King books that were out at the time. And I got this one because this looked amazing. And I was very critical of it when it came out. There were things about it I didn't like. There was a lot of stuff I remember really liking about it. But I thought it was too long. 1,100 pages, it's no surprise. 1,160 pages in this edition. So I thought it was too long. And there's one thing that happens in this book, which I've spoken about before, which is insane, which is just, what? And that kind of torpedoed my enjoyment of the book. It was just so... And if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. But I remember there was that. And so for years, I've had kind of mixed ideas about this book. But an interesting thing has happened since I've been rereading the books that I've already read of Stephen King, and I've been reading books that I've never read by Stephen King. And I've enjoyed Stephen King a lot more now, reading him as an adult. Probably the biggest turnaround so far has been Cujo, which is a book I just didn't like the first time I read it, and thought it was kind of a crappy book. This time reading it, as an adult person, I really liked Cujo. And a lot of the stuff I didn't like when I first read it, I liked this time. I got it now, A lot of Cujo was about the anxieties and fears adults have. So it makes sense that, when I was 16, whenever or however old I was when I read it, that I didn't really get those things, but I enjoyed it a lot more now. So I'm expecting I will probably like this gigantic book a lot more than I did when I was 15. I'm going to guess that is the way it's going to turn out. We'll see. We'll see. But the problem with this is it's so damn big. And so my reading is very scheduled. And every month there are certain things I was planning on reading. This makes that difficult. So I'm going to have to figure that out. How am I going to battle Pennywise and read this in 4 weeks, which is my target, at the same time reading Fantastic Four comic books and other stuff I need to get to if I can get to it? That's going to be a challenge because I am not the fastest reader in the world. So I'm going to have to figure something out about how I'm going to do that. I'm going to have to strategize, And I've been kind of thinking about that. How am I going to read more than I've ever read before in order to finish this book? And I watched some videos about this kind of thing, and none of them are ever helpful. Literally, the only video about reading more that has ever been helpful to me was a video that CriminOlly did. What was it called? How I Read So Much, I think was what it was. It might be titled that. I don't know. CriminOlly, he's a great channel, great guy, reads a lot. And he made a video about how he reads so much, where basically one of the things he says is that he just reads all the time. All the time. He'll be cooking and he's reading. He'll be, he does all kinds of things and he reads at the same time. I'm not sure I could pull that off. But I get what he's saying. I get what he was saying. There are times in my life where I'm not reading, when I could be reading and I'm doing other things. Well, for the next few weeks, I've got to not do those other things. And I got to be no more watching Star Trek, Roger, for the next few weeks. We got to be reading during that time. We got to be reading it. Otherwise, we'll never finish it. Because at the same time, we're going into March, which traditionally is on BookTube March of the Mammoths. I was not expecting to do any mammoths this year if I could help it, except for Varney the Vampire, which will never end, which has got to be on hold for the next few weeks. But this does definitely qualify. I mean, it just so happens that since I'm reading Stephen King in the order that they were published under his own name, this is the next book. So I might as well do it now during March of the Mammoths, where it is appropriate. But at the same time, in March, I've also got Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. At some time, I've got to read The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany, which is a book that's probably going to be a little bit different than the Stephen King book. So how am I going to do that? It's a much shorter book, thank goodness. So I might have to put this down temporarily and pick this up and read it on a weekend or something. Probably going to have to do that. I haven't quite worked it out yet. Also, I'm going to have to do some silly shenanigans to get this done. In a couple weeks, I'm going to go back up to the Rustic Vaughan Lodge, which I haven't been able to get up to because of either weather or work for the last few weeks. My plans of going up there have been scuttled by real life stuff. But I am going to be going up there in a couple weeks. And I'm thinking one of those nights that I'm there, I'm just going to stay up all night. I'm going to stay up all night and see how much of this book I could read. By not sleeping, I'm just going to stay up all night and read all night long. And I'll make a dopey blog about it or something, and you can see what kind of awful condition I'm in by the next morning. And how much did I actually read? It probably won't actually be as much as I want, but we'll see. I'm going to have to do stuff like that to get through this book. But I am kind of looking forward to it. And I have to say, I've read 60 pages of this since yesterday. It's good so far, I have to say. The opening of this with the little boy and the newspaper boat, that was terrifying. That was really well done by Stephen King. I have to say, when he's good, he's really good. And so far, I don't know if it's going to continue in this manner, but so far it's good. Good 60 pages anyway. We'll see what the next 1,100 pages have in store for us, Roger. But I'm going to have to figure out a way to get it done. And, you will see in the weeks to come whether I am successful or if I fail miserably. It's happened a time or two in the past when I failed miserably at something like this, but we'll see. Okay, I'm going to let you go. I have to read this book like all day. Okay, guys, we'll catch you next time.